Yeah, I know. Save it. What the hell is going on with his beard? Ah, please. The other morning, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. My dogs get me up. I'm exhausted. I'm shot, right? I let the dogs out. I go upstairs. I go to the bathroom. I look in the mirror. I'm like, oh my God, I'm looking like homeless. I got to do something. I got to trim, right? So I grabbed the electric razor, and it's got like a guard on it, okay? You know, to keep it a certain distance. You know what I'm talking about. So I turn the razor on, and it's not doing anything. And I'm looking at it like, and I run it under the water, and it's still like, it's just going, it's not really, you know, doing its thing. Tap it a couple of times, nothing. So I take the guard off, right? And I'm looking at it, I'm running under the water, and then finally it starts to make a little bit of a buzzing noise. And I'm like, I guess that's it. And I went, took it right off. I was like, oh, jeez, what do I do now? I guess I'll just have to film from this side of my face. It's not, to hell with it. I'll just even it out. So yeah, that's what's going on with it's not a new style. I just screwed up. So, all right. So let's talk about ignition systems. Let's talk about indexing the distributor cap. The reason this comes up is because of the video we did the other day showing this rotor and the amount of play that it had on the distributor that it was mounted on. It's a defective part. So after I did this video, it reminded me of an incident that happened years ago. And it's like my parts cannon story. Every mechanic has a parts cannon story. And like no valuable lesson is ever learned the easy way, right? So, tell you the parts cannon story. I picked up a 360. It was a mid-70s. It was a car with a mid-70s 360 in it. And first thing I noticed was that everything under the hood was new. New cap, rotor, wires, plugs, distributor. Everything was fresh. Everything was new. Every filter. Like they really went out of their way. They did a complete 10-yard tune-up on this thing. But it ran like hell. So at idle, it runs fine. Low speeds, just cruising around easy, it runs fine. But you get it up over like 40 miles an hour, anything like that, you stop on it, you lean on the thing, it's terrible. It just falls on its face. It's misfiring, backfiring, bucking. So I mean, just terrible, undrivable. What could this be? So now I start checking things. Like I said, everything is fresh in there. But I check the voltage to the coil. I look at the coil, I look at a nice, perfect, bright blue spark. I check the resistance on the wires, and even each wire I've got a bright blue spark. The plugs are all good. Put it all back together again, drive it, same exact thing. Gotta be the pickup. It was electronic ignition. It had all the symptoms of a bad condenser, but it was electronic ignition, so it didn't have a condenser. And I changed the pickup. Same thing. 2,500, 3,000 RPM or thereabouts, and it just will not go any further than that. Hard, harsh, violent misfiring. Now I throw the parts cannon at it, right? I just replace everything. Again, just like the previous people did. Everything except the distributor. But because I already changed the pickup on it, right? Okay. So this is what I found. I noticed that, oh yeah, obviously the parts cannon didn't fix the problem either. It was exactly the same. So this is what I found. Every time I went to put the distributor cap back on, I noticed that I had a little problem getting these clips on. They were just slightly askewed, and I had to wrestle them to get them into place. All right. I said, maybe this has something to do with it. I mean, I'm at my wit's end. I've tried everything, okay? I says, let's just set this up so that the clips come off easy. So you see on these Chryslers, and this doesn't matter, V8 points, electronic ignition, slant 6, they're all the same. They have this tang, this little metal tang that's attached to the vacuum advance canister. And that had been replaced on this distributor. It was a fresh distributor that was in this car. So I took this tab and I bent it out of the way, and I put the cap back on, lined up so that the clips went on easily. All right? Start the car up. Sounds good. Take it for a ride. Problem solved. Job done. when the remanufacturer, whoever rebuilt the distributor, replaced the vacuum advance canister, they did it with a defective one that had this tab, this tang, off a little bit. So it changed the phasing of the cap. When I bent it straight and I indexed it basically just to the tabs that hold it down, now it was fine, everything was good. And this is why, when we did this video the other day about this rotor, why that could cause all sorts of crazy problems, because the phasing of the rotor, the contacts on the cap, and the contact on the rotor here has to be, this is not the, obviously it's not the rotor for this cap, but it has to be so that from completely retarded mechanical advance to completely advanced mechanical advance, this has to be in contact and or in extremely close proximity to the contact on the cap. If this is off a little bit, if it's not indexed correctly, then when it goes full advance, or possibly full retard, but when it goes full advance, there's enough of a gap between here and the contact on the cap that the spark will start jumping around. It'll start to misfire, right? So this is something, that's why when we talked about this being such a possible performance issue, that's what we're talking about. The phasing and the indexing of the rotor to the cap should be considered, if you're building a hot rod, especially if you're building a hot rod, but this should be considered an essential thing to check. So all different distributors have different ways of indexing the cap to the distributor body itself. Like for instance, the Chrysler uses this. The HEI has a little square bit that fits into the body of the distributor. And talking about rotor phasing, the HEI is a pretty good example. Actually, it's a very good example of what we're talking about. So, 1975, when they introduced the HEI, this was like the peak of the smog era. In order to get the engines to perform, to do the things that they had to do, they had to greatly increase the amount of mechanical advance. They needed the timing to be retarded at low speeds for emissions purposes, but those engines also had no compression. And so they needed as much advance as they can get at the other end so that they would perform. So because of that, so here's a mechanical advance on a Chrysler. Here's your weights, and here's your limiting slots. Right? And on the General Motors distributors, it's up top over here. But it's much better on the General Motors. It's easier. It's under the rotor. But on these Chryslers, these centrifugal advance, well, actually on all distributors that have mechanical advance, centrifugal advance, that limiting slot limits the amount that the weights can come out, and the difference in phasing between the driven part of the distributor and the rotor part, the top part. So what happens is, as the advance weights come out, the top part of the distributor rotates ahead of the bottom part of the distributor. Because the ignition spread, the advance spread, had become so great during that period of time, General Motors went with a big distributor cap with a long contact. So instead of having the short contacts like they have on these, they had that long contact and a lot of space in between. They went to that big diameter cap to compensate for the amount of mechanical advance that was necessary at that point to have the car run and meet all of the emission standards. That's why those caps are that large diameter. Ford did the same thing. Chrysler went to a lean, what they call the lean burn system, which was junk. But the big cap, the big diameter cap wasn't necessary for that setup because it used two sets of pickups and that were staggered, and the computer would switch between one set of pickup and the other, and that's how they balance the ignition timing on those. So with that primitive computer taking care of the ignition timing on the Chryslers, they eliminated the vacuum advance from the distributor body and also the mechanical advance from inside the distributor. So that big diameter cap with that extra spread wasn't necessary on the Chryslers. All right, so how do you go about confirming that your rotor is correctly phased to the cap? Now, the corrective measures you would take depend on A, where the point of inaccuracy is, and B, what kind of system you're working with, because all of these ignition systems, all these distributors and caps and combinations all have different nuances. But checking and confirming that the ignition system is indexed correctly is pretty straightforward and it's pretty universal. I'll show you on that end. So here's what you want to do. Let's just say, and I'm going to just use round numbers. This is all depending on what your spec is. Well, let's just say you're going to fire your plug 15 degrees before top dead center. That's going to be your base timing, 15 degrees before top dead center. What you want to do is you want to rotate your motor, top dead center. Number 1 cylinder, top dead center compression stroke. Get your lines lined up. Now go back your 15 degrees. Actually, you should probably go 16 or 17 degrees backwards and then come up on it to hit your 15. And that's just because of timing chain stretch. You want to make all of your ignition timing moves in the direction of rotation. All right, so we're going to bring it back up and we're going to line it up to 15 degrees before top dead center. Now you take your distributor. The distributor should be in the motor, snugged down. And you want to rotate the distributor so that you're at the point where it's going to fire the coil. So let's say on points, it's going to be just where the points open. If it's electronic ignition, just where the contacts are in closest proximity to each other. And that's where it's going to fire the coil. So now lock your distributor down there. Now you're all set to fire at 15 degrees before top dead center. Now, with the rotor in place, in a relaxed position, you want to make a mark on a distributor body lined up with the contact. Then take the rotor and push it all the way in the direction of advance and make a second mark on a distributor body that corresponds with that. Then you take your cap. These caps here, these index off of this little notch here and the pin in the distributor body. So with that point, you want to put your cap on and you want to make sure that if this is your number 1 post, you want to make sure that this post is within the range of these 2 marks. Actually, you want to make sure it's closest to your retarded mark because advanced, it's going to swing all the way out. The key thing to remember here is that the contact on the rotor has got to stay within close proximity of the contact on the cap. Now, if it has to jump a spark, if you've got it to where it's a large enough gap, let's just say it's just off, like about yay much. Can you see that? Let's just say you're there at full advance, okay? It's got to jump that gap. The larger the gap that you create inside the distributor, the larger that gap, the more trouble you're going to have down the road. That's how you burn the contacts on rotors. That's how you burn up ignition, like coil wires. That's how you burn up coils. It doesn't have to be far enough out that it's going to throw a spark to the next cylinder to be a problem. That'll be your immediate problem. But the long-term problem is definitely going to be, it's going to eat ignition parts, and you're not going to know why. And that's the reason why. So that's it. Simple hot rodding basics, or I should say simple fine-tuning and ignition system blueprinting basics. If you're going to go a little bit, you might as well go all the way. Do all this stuff correctly, and you're going to minimize all of your potential for problems. And that's it. I hope you got something out of that, and hopefully next time I see you, I'll have better facial hair. See you tomorrow.